Hi, Sunshines. Welcome to the channel. Today we are going to talk about major scales and chords and how they relate to scales. I am Ivy. I've been producing for 20 years and music theory is kind of my thing. And I have JR with me.
I am a EDM producer. I've been producing for about 5 years, and I pretty much know music theory.
Cool. So we're just going to kind of go on an adventure. So this will be fun. We're going to do it completely in the DAW. You don't have to worry about sheet music or anything like that. That's kind of the whole point of this, is it just makes it a little bit easier to see. Right there,
Nice.
That relationship looks so much simpler. And you can see how it travels. These are all just major chords. And you can kind of see that right in the DAW, which is why I want to do this. So first things first, the major scale. Even if you don't know anything about music theory, you kind of know the major scale if you've been a producer. Because I'm sure you've come across the whole, just play the white keys from C to C. There you go. That's the major scale. Yes, but it also doesn't really explain anything whatsoever. Like, how do you transfer that? How do you get to other major scales without just going, yes, good ears. So what you want to do is you want to look at the relationship of the notes. And we've got half steps between every single note. So C to C sharp is a half step, C sharp to D, D to D sharp to E, so on and so forth. That make sense?
Yeah.
2 half steps
So far.
are a whole step, right? 2 halves are whole. So 2 half steps are a whole step. So C to D, that's 2 movements. 1, 2. So there's a whole step.
Okay. So you count every note, including the black notes, when you're counting like through them.
Yes, every time.
Okay.
Every single time, any movement in one direction or another is a half step. It does not matter if it's E to F, or if it's F to F sharp, or if it's A sharp to B. Doesn't matter. So,
and how many are there again between? I can't remember.
like from C to C, 12.
Yeah, between a scale.
Yeah, we have 12 notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And then back to 1. So our major scale is a whole step, half step, another whole, and then a half. So 2 whole steps and a half step, and then 3 whole steps, and then half step. If you take that relationship with you anywhere, this is the really cool thing about this, is very easily, if we move this up, there's D flat major. There's D major. A scale is a relationship of X amount of notes. It's the spacing relationship between those notes, whether it's a 5-note scale, a 7-note scale, a 12-note scale, a 6-note scale. You can have the whole tone scale. It's only 6 notes. It doesn't really matter how many notes there are for the general idea of a scale. A scale is just a relationship of spaces between individual notes. That's it. That's all it is. So if you know the spaces for a major scale, you can make a major scale anywhere. Every time I move this, I have myself a new major scale. That's one of the cool things about seeing this in the DAW, is that makes that really easy to understand. Because playing it in the piano is a whole different beast. If I go from C major, all the white keys, D flat major, now I've got D flat, E flat, F, G flat, A flat, B flat, C, D flat, and that's harder to play on the piano. But in here, you can click it in if you want. So from your bass note, you have 2 holes and a half, 3 holes and a half. There you go. That's the major scale.
Got it. Okay.
So chords, the easy version, but not complete version of the explanation, is play a note, skip a note. If you want to make a chord, you do that. You're going to be good to go as long as you are in the scale that you be in. So if I play a note, and then I skip this note, and then I play this note, and then I skip this note, and I do it one more time, I've got myself C major. If I play this note, skip this one, play here, skip this, play here, I've got myself D minor. But they're all white keys, and I'm doing the same exact thing. Why is one major? Why is one minor? If I move this down here, you'll see pattern difference. Your middle note is down by half a step. So if you're looking at the spatial differences, for a major chord, you need what's called a major third. So we've got our root, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, back to our root, or our eighth, our octave. So your thirds, you have a major third and a minor third. It's actually where the chords get their name from. So C major tells you that your bottom note is C and your third is a major third. 4 half steps, 2 whole steps, however you want to look at it. I look at it as 4 half steps because of the way the minor third works. Minor third is 3 half steps. So C major tells you about these 2 notes. C minor tells you about these 2 notes. C with a major third, with a minor third. It doesn't tell you about this. We'll get into it at some point, but basically, anytime you're playing a triad, a 3-note chord, you're gonna play the 5th because that's what you do. Is that a terrible explanation of it? Yes, but I'm not going down that rabbit hole right now. So, the information you're given is only these 2 notes, but you also play the 5th with it, and the 5th is another third on top. A couple ways you can look at it. If you have C major, you have a major third with a minor third on top. A third? What do you mean? Spacing. The minor third. The minor, you have a minor third with a major third on top. Major third, what are we talking about? Well, look at the spacing. Exact thing. Each triad has a major third and a minor third in it. Which one comes first tells you the name of the chord. Now, there are more complicated versions of triads. You have diminished chords, which are just major thirds, or minor thirds, sorry. So diminished, it's the smallest chord you can get. Have augmented. To augment is to make bigger, right? So augmented chords, those are the largest triads that you can get. Major thirds. Any bigger, and you don't have a third, you get into your 4th for spacing. So we're not going to worry too much about those, although the diminished does happen with this note right here. Your 7th chord is a diminished chord. That's why it sounds the way that it does. Oops. Hello, C.
Then to clarify, would 2 notes, like say you just play C and E in this case, that would technically not be a chord?
It's
would just be a
dyad.
harmony? Okay.
So a 2-note chord is a dyad, and you can use those to great effect. You can actually use it either way. So C to E is going to sound like C major. C to E flat is going to sound like C minor, because again, what is the important part of the chord? The root note and the third, right? So we know that's C major. We know that's C minor. But what if it's your root and your 5th? We have absolutely no identifying information for whether we are in major or minor when we do that. Interestingly enough, that is a power chord. A power chord, or a 5 chord, is just your root, your 5, and your root again. That's it. That's all that is. So if you play a bunch of power chords on the guitar, that's what you're doing, is this. It's very open, it sounds really cool, and it leaves you open for a lot of things. So if I just do this right here, as long as I don't touch my 3, we'll get into the top half of this in a little bit. But for now, we're just going to look at these. If I don't touch my 3, you don't know what I'm in. Now we're in major. We know we're in major as soon as you hit that 3. If I do it again, now we're in minor, and we know we're in minor, and that one note completely recontextualizes what was more or less the same melody.
Yeah.
So you can create an air of mystery by sticking to your 1, your 2, your 4, and your 5. Because, though we aren't going to get into the minor scale, I'll show you, there's a little bit of difference here. There's a notational difference. If you change the spacing, you change the scale. Like we were saying before, what is a scale? It's just the relationship of space between individual notes, however many you have in that scale. That's it. So if you change the spacing, you change the scale. If you change the spacing for a single note, you change the scale. If I do this, we've got a new scale. And it gives us new chords. Why does it give us new chords? Because the way that we build chords, right, with the play a note, skip a note thing. We do that with the one that I showed here, where we take this up here and we go up here, called Lydian. We'll get into that another time. But if I move that up to stay within that scale, I have a new chord, don't I? We were talking about major and minor. Suddenly my 2 becomes major instead of minor. So if you change the spacing between any of the notes, you change the scale, and you also change the chords that are available to you if you're staying within key.
Okay.
So what are the chords that are available to you in the major scale? This can really help shape the feeling of whatever it is that you're trying to write. Because except for the 7th chord, which is wonky, it's a diminished chord, everything in here is either a major chord or a minor chord. So we've got major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished. Those are your 7 chords. And so if you're looking at music theory through a more typical lens, that's 1 major, 2 minor, 3 minor, 4 major, 5 minor, or 5 major, 6 minor, 7 diminished. And the number just comes from which one it is in the scale, really. And so if you know this information and you want to make something really just puke-worthy bright and shiny, what are you going to use? Your 1, your 4, and your 5, right? Major, 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 major. All major chords. This is how you get sunshines and rainbows coming out of your ass. If you just go 1, 4, 5, you're good to go. If you want a little bit more nuanced feeling, you could add maybe the 6. And the 6 is the most common addition. And that's where you actually end up getting this here. Major 1, major 5, minor 6, minor 4. So even though I'm going below the 1, does the naming of the chords make sense?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
But so the scale is major C major from C to C, correct?
Yeah, the scale is C major.
But there's a lot more minors in C major.
There are 3
than there are majors.
No, there are 3 minors, 1 diminished, and 3 majors. The scale gets its name from the first chord within that scale, and the first chord within that scale is C major.
Okay. So it doesn't matter what's inside the scale other than the first chord for the naming convention.
For your major and your minor scale.
Okay.
it's a way that you can relate it. Technically speaking, those two aren't entirely related. C Lydian starts with a major chord, but to remember how to make those chords, you can think of it that way. C major starts with C major. C minor starts with C. So
All right, got it.
yeah, and so if you want to make something, knowing that there are the minor chords in there and what minor chords you have available to you, you can use those to make something that pulls a little bit more at the heartstrings, right? So this is still major. But this time, I used my 3 minor chords. So I only had one major chord, and that was to start and land so that you knew we were in C major, basically. And otherwise, I'm using my minor chords. Now, your 3rd chord has a kind of special tonal relationship in the major scale. It is going to drop that feeling. It's going to feel the heaviest out of everything. If I move from 1 to 6, it's obviously minor, but it's not like, holy crap. If I go from 1 to 2, obviously minor, not super sad though. But 1 to 3, that's how you start pulling on the heartstrings. And part of it is this relationship right here. You're going from like this happy movement down a half step. So it still works like this, but voicing is an important thing, right?
Voicing being what exactly?
Voicing is how you play the chord. It's the difference between this and this. They're both C major. C, E, G. Or this. C, E, G. You're still playing C major. Wherever you play it on the piano at the end of the day, if you play C, E, G, it's C major. This is what it is. It doesn't matter where it's at. You could have the C down here, the G right there, and the E right there. You're still playing C major. How you voice it just means how you play it, where you're playing the note. If you're playing it really compact like that, or if you're doing an inversion, which is just a changing of the positioning of the notes. If you're spreading it way out, any of those things, that's voicing.
I see.
That better.
Okay.
So how you voice the chords can be really important. We were kind of talking about that before we got on camera, where you were playing this, and like that's super crunchy, but when you bring it down here, it's all smooth. It sounds so good. And that's because of that voicing. Now, instead of this half step, you have 11 half steps in between these two notes. You still kind of get that crunch, but it's not like, oh my god, my ears are dying, you know? So,
okay, cool.
And just like with the spacing of the chords, or the spacing of the scale, the spacing of the chords works the same way. If you move it up, you've got a whole new scale. Here's D flat, D major, that, D major. Crazy. It's as if the spacing is exactly the same. So if you learn your spacing for your scales and for your chords, that alone helps so much. And you start learning over time, like, oh, okay, this is what this is. This is the scale that I'm in. One way that you can practice that is to take and just play around in, whether you're playing the piano, whether you're clicking things in, it doesn't really matter. Play around in a specific scale. C major is a lot of times where we start. Even visually, it can be really helpful here because it's just the white keys. And then move that whole thing up a half a step. Suddenly your song is in D flat major, but it still looks the same, and you can start understanding how those notes look. One of the things that you can do for yourself as you're learning that is, if we just here, we're not actually going to make anything. Now, what notes we can use?
Oh.
You're absolutely able to go outside of the key. You should go outside of the key regularly. But as you're learning how to play within a scale, this is one of the ways that you can do that. Just make this little thing real quick and then spread it out and put it on something that you play, and then you just kind of have it in the background. There are tools in various DAWs where you can kind of cut it down so you can see only that scale. And while it makes it a lot easier to make a melody and to make the correct harmonies or whatever, it's very correctness is incredibly variable with music. It means that you can't access the other notes, which I'm not a big fan of that limitation. I would rather you learn how to make your scales and what notes need to be within that scale to be able to play whatever it is that you want. If you want something that sounds maybe a little bit jazzier in a major scale, as soon as I hit this note, that is something that I can't play if I use those tools. Because they eliminate my access to that note, because it makes sure that this is the only access that I have. So it's a quick workaround, but I don't actually like it very much as a function, because there's so many things that you could do otherwise that you now can't do.
All right.
And that takes, like, later on, we'll talk about how to make chords outside of the key. Again, if I use that tool, I couldn't make that chord progression, and it sounds cool. So,
yeah.
I mean, that's chords. That's the major scale. Does all of that make sense? Do you have any?
Yeah, overall, that makes sense. I'll mention something for people who use Logic. If you want to experiment with chords and just see as well every chord that's inside of a certain scale, there is a default MIDI effect called Chord Trigger. And you can set whatever scale you want, and then if you hit one note, it'll play the entire chord. And then you can learn chords, like learn whatever chord you play, and then play whatever note, and it'll play in that set of, like, that ratio of notes. So you can figure out what other chords you can use with that.
That's actually, FL Studio has something like that. If you hit this little button right here, you can take any chords or scales that show up on here. So if we hit the major chord and then got the major chord immediately. So that's a quick way to build it if you don't know it. Try not to rely on that, though. Try to, like I said before, try to learn this spacing. What does this look like in context, and how can you make it? But if you need to make it quickly and you don't understand yet, then you can just click this. Here's the major chord. Go right into your chords in here. We're not going to now, but that is something that you help yourself out, especially in the beginning. So go out, take the major scale, make something out of it. I want to see it. I want to see what you do. Link it in the YouTube comments. How do you use this information? What questions do you have? What else do you want about? And see you again soon to talk about the natural minor scale. Why do I call it that? Anyway, thank you for stopping by, and y'all have a beautiful day.